dawn hadn't fully decided what it wanted to be yet. Just pewter light leaking through the pines, mist hanging low over the trail like breath held too long. The retired veteran walked with the quiet economy of someone who'd learned to conserve motion. Boots finding the packed earth without a crunch. Shoulders relaxed, but never careless. Eyes scanning the way they did even when he told himself he was only out here for peace. This loop behind town was his truce. With everything that followed him home, the sleepless nights, the sudden flinches at sharp sounds, the memories that liked to surface when life got too quiet. Beside him padded Ranger, loyal and tuned like an instrument. A solid-bodied dog with alert eyes and a stride that matched the veteran's pace as if they'd been training together their whole lives. Ranger wasn't just company. He was rhythm, routine, and an early warning system wrapped in fur. The creek off to the left whispered under stones, and every now and then a bird called from the higher branches, testing the morning. The air smelled like wet cedar, cold soil, and distant chimney smoke from town. They rounded a bend where the trees grew closer and the brush thickened, and the hush changed, subtle but real, like the forest had leaned in and decided to listen. Ranger slowed, then stopped so abruptly the veteran nearly bumped him. The dog's ears pinned forward, nostrils flaring, tail frozen mid-swing, and he looked back once. Not playful, not curious. Checking in, asking, "Are we doing this?" The veteran followed his gaze into the tree line and saw only fog caught in needles and the dark lattice of trunks. "Easy," he murmured, voice low, and Ranger slipped into the brush with purpose, not bounding after wildlife, not meandering. For a few seconds there was nothing but the veteran's breath and the soft drip of moisture from leaves. Then a sharp crack snapped from deeper in the woods, dry wood breaking, sudden and wrong. Ranger burst back out as if launched, mud smeared across his chest and forelegs, breath coming fast, eyes wide but locked on the veteran like he had something important to deliver. He ran straight to him and dropped something at his boots with a wet slap, then stood over it, body angled protectively, head up. A torn piece of clothing lay in the mud, jagged-edged, threads stretched like it had been ripped in panic. It wasn't weathered. It wasn't sun-bleached. The fabric still looked new enough to hold warmth, and the air above it carried a faint, clean scent. Laundry detergent. Cut by something metallic underneath that made the veteran's stomach tighten. One corner was stained darker than the rest, not enough to name, but enough to trigger that familiar internal shift. Calm to controlled focus. He didn't touch it barehanded. He pulled a folded bandana from his pocket, knelt, and lifted the cloth by the cleanest edge, eyes tracking the seam line, the torn stitching, the way one side had been snagged and yanked hard. Ranger went still, the kind of stillness that meant threat, and a low rumble built in his chest, aimed into the fog between the trees. The veteran rose slowly, cloth wrapped in the bandana like evidence, and listened, hard, until Ranger's growl sharpened, as if someone stood there just beyond sight. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, the town had already slipped back into its practiced performance of normal. Slow traffic rolling down Main Street like it had nowhere urgent to be. The bakery's door chiming with each customer. A kid wobbling on a bike in front of the hardware store while an older man pretended not to steady the handlebars with 2 fingers. The veteran moved through it all with Ranger at heel. And if anyone looked closely, they would have seen the difference between him and the other early risers. He didn't drift. He navigated. His posture was relaxed, sure, but it was the kind of relaxed that came from competence, not naivete. He knew where the exits were without turning his head. He noticed which window reflections didn't match the sidewalk. He heard when laughter landed half a beat late. In a place like this, People wore friendliness like a uniform. And he'd learned a long time ago that uniforms could hide anything. He stopped at the diner, Hattie's, with its sun-faded sign and the smell of coffee that hit you like a warm hand on the shoulder. And regulars nodded as he passed, calling him Sir or Buddy, depending on how well they knew him. Inside, the clink of forks on plates and the soft hum of conversation wrapped around him. And for a moment, with the cracked vinyl booths and the condensation on the windows, it could have been any sleepy town, any harmless morning. Ranger sat on cue beside the booth, chest up, eyes tracking the room in calm sweeps. People loved to call him a good boy, but the veteran didn't let strangers reach down without asking. Ranger's job wasn't to entertain, it was to read the world. A dog like that gave warnings before a human ever saw the danger. Stillness before a storm. A stare that pinned the truth to the floor. The waitress, June, slid a mug of black coffee onto the table like she'd been doing it for years. "Same as always?" she asked, smiling. "Same as always," he answered, and his tone made it sound like a promise. He took one sip. Then his hand drifted to the pocket where the torn cloth was sealed away. Ranger's nose twitched immediately, head turning as if pulled by an invisible thread. The dog leaned in, sniffing the air near the veteran's jacket, and a low, uncertain sound vibrated in his throat. Not a growl, not a whine, something in between. The veteran stared down at his coffee as if it held answers, but his mind was back in the mist. Back in that dragged scuff line and the earned silence. "You smell it," he murmured under his breath. Ranger thumped his tail once, one controlled thud, then pressed his nose again toward the pocket like he could pull the truth out through fabric. The veteran ate slowly, listening more than he spoke, catching fragments of talk drifting from nearby tables. The water line being worked on again, a church raffle, a girl from out of town, who hadn't been seen since last week, spoken with that casual cruelty some folks used when they didn't want to name a fear. He watched faces as people said it, noting who frowned and who avoided looking up. When he stood to leave, Ranger rose instantly, perfectly timed. But his focus stayed on the veteran's jacket, nostrils flaring, body angled toward the door like the trail was calling him back. Outside, the street looked painted in sunshine, harmless as a postcard. Flags fluttering from porches, a dog barking somewhere behind a fence, tires whispering over asphalt. The veteran clipped Ranger's leash and started toward home, expecting the dog to settle into their usual rhythm. Ranger didn't. He lagged half a step, then stopped altogether on the sidewalk, head turned sharply toward the edge of town, where the trees began again, where morning fog still clung in pockets like it didn't want to leave. "Come on," the veteran said softly, giving the leash a gentle cue. Ranger planted his paws, not stubborn, intent. The veteran tried another step. Ranger resisted, eyes fixed, ears forward, breathing shallow. People passed them with polite smiles, assuming it was nothing more than a dog being difficult. The veteran felt the lie in that assumption, like grit in his teeth. He crouched beside Ranger, placed a steady hand on his shoulder, and followed the dog's gaze. The trees at the town's edge looked ordinary from here, just green and shadow, but Ranger's posture said otherwise. The veteran's pocket felt heavier than fabric should, and Ranger sniffed it again, then looked up at him like a question he couldn't translate into words. The veteran tightened his grip on the leash, not to force, but to anchor. "You don't want to go home," he whispered, more statement than question. Ranger didn't move. He just stood there, refusing the route they'd walked 100 times, as if home suddenly wasn't the safest place to be. Or as if whatever happened in those woods had followed them out, hiding behind the town's friendly face, waiting for someone to pretend it wasn't real. He didn't drag Ranger home after that. didn't ignore the refusal like it was a mood, because he'd learned the hard way that instincts, especially trained ones, were data. Instead, he walked them straight to the only place in town where lost things were supposed to end up. The community board inside the general store. A cluttered wall of handwritten notices and fading flyers that tried to make a small town feel like a family. The bell over the door chimed as they entered, and the familiar smells hit him. Floor cleaner, feed sacks, cinnamon gum at the checkout. Two old men by the coffee urn glanced over, nodded, went back to their talk. Behind the counter, the clerk, Marla, wore the same pleasant expression she wore for everyone. The kind that said, "I'm friendly because that's what we do here." Ranger walked in at heel, calm but taut. Eyes sweeping the aisles once, twice, then settling on the veteran's jacket pocket as if it was a live wire. The veteran approached the counter at an angle that let him see the front windows and the door behind her. And when Marla asked, "Morning, hon. What can I do for you?" he kept his voice even. "Found something on the trail," he said. "Wanted to check if anyone reported missing clothing." He didn't pull the cloth out immediately. He watched her face first. Then, when she nodded and reached for the battered binder labeled "Lost and Found," he placed the bandana-wrapped piece on the counter like it was fragile, like it mattered. The smile on Marla's face didn't vanish. It tightened. That's what told him everything. Her eyes dropped to the fabric, just a flicker, but it was enough. Recognition, or fear, or both, before she snapped them back up to his. "Oh," she said, too bright, fingers suddenly clumsy as she flipped pages. "Well, folks lose things all the time out there. Gloves, hats, kids' jackets." Her words came fast, like she wanted to outrun the object in front of her. The veteran unwrapped the cloth slowly, just enough to show the tear and the seam, and Ranger leaned forward to sniff, nostrils flaring, then pulled back with a soft huff like the scent offended him. The veteran's eyes tracked the fabric the way he might read a map. Not just what it was, but what it implied. The material was a dense knit blend, soft on one side, smoother on the other, more like a sweatshirt or casual top than anything meant for a cold hike through brush. No waterproof coating, no reinforced stitching, no neon safety strip or outdoors brand label, and the torn edge had been ripped hard, not caught and gently frayed. Marla kept flipping pages without really seeing them. "Nothing's been turned in," she said, and her tone tried to make it a conclusion. "You could just toss it, honestly. Probably blew off someone's pack." "Probably," the veteran echoed, and he let the word hang there while his eyes stayed on her hands. Her knuckles were white around the binder. He tapped the seam with one finger, careful not to smear anything. "This isn't trail gear," he said quietly. "Feels like something you'd wear to the diner. Or to church. Not a ridge hike." Marla swallowed. "People wear all sorts of things," she said, and then laughed. "Small, brittle. Fashions weird these days." Ranger's head turned toward the back of the store, ears pricked, attention snapping away from the cloth to something unseen. And the veteran felt the atmosphere shift, the way a room changes when a secret gets heavier. One of the old men, near the coffee urn, went silent mid-sentence. A woman by the seed packets froze with a bag in her hands. The veteran's gaze slid over them, catching faces that suddenly found reasons to look anywhere else. Someone else, young, early 20s maybe, wearing a work shirt and oil-stained jeans, had been browsing the rack of boots near the window. He'd been half listening, pretending not to. Now he stepped closer like he couldn't help himself. His eyes locked on the cloth for 1 second too long, and his voice dropped to a whisper that didn't belong in a cheerful store. "You didn't find that near Old Ridge, did you?" The question hit the veteran like a cold draft under a door. Marla's smile collapsed completely this time, and she snapped the binders shut with a hard slap. Ranger let out a low, warning rumble aimed toward the young man. Not aggression, just alert. Because the dog had heard it too. The name Old Ridge carried weight. The veteran slowly rewrapped the cloth, his mind already drawing lines between a torn seam, a trail segment, and the way half the town seemed to stop breathing at the same time. He looked at the young man, calm as stone. "Why?" he asked. The young man's throat bobbed. His eyes darted to the front windows, then to the door, as if expecting someone to walk in and punish him for speaking. "Because," he started, then swallowed the rest. "Because stuff goes missing up there." He lowered his voice even further, and the veteran had to lean in to catch it. "And people who ask questions don't stay welcome." Outside the general store, the sunshine felt like a lie. Someone was trying too hard to sell. Bright on the sidewalks and too warm on the veteran's neck for how cold his thoughts had turned. He didn't press the young man in public, didn't put him on the spot where fear could make him shut down or make someone else take note. He only gave a small, acknowledging nod that said, "I heard you." And then he walked Ranger to the edge of the parking lot where the wind carried fewer words. Protector mode wasn't a switch he flipped with drama. It was a quiet alignment of priorities. Preserve evidence, establish timeline, reduce uncertainty. He opened the tailgate of his truck and pulled out what he always carried. Not paranoia, just preparedness. A zip bag, a small notebook with water-resistant pages, a pen, and a phone with a camera lens kept clean. The torn cloth stayed wrapped in the bandana until he could bag it without contamination. He used the bandana like a barrier, sliding the fabric into the plastic with slow care, sealing it, then sealing that inside a second bag. Ranger stood behind him, body angled toward the street, eyes scanning like radar, ears twitching at every passing engine. The dog wasn't restless. He was tracking, nose lifting to taste the air in small pulls, as if the scent from the woods had threaded itself through town and refused to break. The veteran snapped photos, the cloth inside the bag, the tear pattern close up, the seam detail, the staining, the partial tag fragment if it appeared again under the light. Then he photographed his own mud-streaked boot and Ranger's paws for later comparison, because every detail mattered when someone tried to call you dramatic. He opened his notebook and wrote like he was filing a report, because he was, even if nobody else would. Date, time, location coordinates from his trail app, weather, low fog at Discovery, ground saturated, temperature cool, light wind from the west. The route, trailhead to Creek Bend, the thick brush line 30 yards beyond the switchback, the scuff mark that cut toward denser timber. He drew it, simple lines and landmarks, and then he circled the point where Ranger had emerged like a warning shot. Ranger turned abruptly toward the tree line beyond the last row of houses, just a sliver of green at the edge of town, and froze, nose high. The veteran followed his gaze and saw nothing but a stand of pines and morning haze. But Ranger's posture said that nothing was watching. "We're going to do this clean," the veteran murmured, more to himself than the dog. He didn't need heroics. He needed procedure. He climbed into the truck, closed the door, and called the local non-emergency number first, because that's what a responsible citizen does before the world forces you to do otherwise. The line rang twice. Then a voice answered with practiced casualness. The veteran kept his tone calm and clipped, giving only facts. "This is a report," he said. "Found a torn piece of clothing on the trail near Old Ridge Access. Fresh. Looks like it was ripped by force. I have it bagged, photographed, marked location and time. A pause on the other end, small but real, like someone had stopped writing. Uh-huh, the dispatcher said, and there was a faint change in her voice, less bored, more careful. And you said, Old Ridge? Yes, the veteran replied. Ranger's head snapped toward the passenger window, and a low growl rose in his throat, directed at the street outside as a pickup rolled past too slowly. The veteran watched it through the glass, memorizing the plate without moving his head, then returned to the call. I'd like an officer to meet me. I can bring the item to the station if you prefer, but I'm keeping chain of custody intact. Another pause. Then faintly, beneath the dispatcher's breathing, the veteran heard a tiny sound, an almost imperceptible click, like a second line joining, like someone lifting a receiver. His eyes narrowed. He'd heard that sound in tents and temporary offices overseas, in places where privacy was a luxury. He kept his voice steady anyway. Ma'am, he said, are you patching someone into this call? Silence. And then the dispatcher spoke too quickly. No, sir, not at all. It's just... Hold on one moment. The click came again, sharper this time, and the veteran's stomach tightened. He glanced at Ranger, who was now staring hard at the tree line, muscles rigid, as if the scent had turned into a direction. Listen, the veteran said into the phone, lowering his voice. I'm requesting a unit. If you cannot dispatch one, I need that noted. I am retaining evidence. The dispatcher exhaled, and for a second it sounded like she wanted to say something else, something honest. But then the line filled with a thin, electronic hiss. There was a final, decisive click, and the call dropped dead. The veteran stared at the blank screen for one beat too long. The quiet inside the cab suddenly heavy, and outside Ranger's growl deepened as if the dog had heard the same thing. Not just a disconnection, but a warning. He didn't sit there and stew, because stewing wastes time, and time was what people counted on you to waste when they wanted a problem to fade. The veteran started the truck, drove straight to the station, and kept his speed exactly at the limit. Not because he was afraid, but because he refused to give anyone a reason to reframe this as him being reckless. The building sat behind the courthouse like a shadow. Squat brick with a flag out front and a row of government vehicles lined up like they owned the street. Ranger stayed quiet in the passenger seat, eyes forward, body tense, watching reflections in windows the way the veteran watched them too. Inside, the station smelled like old coffee, paper, and disinfectant, and the waiting area had a TV mounted high. Turned to a morning news channel, no one was actually watching. A couple of locals sat in plastic chairs. One woman clutching a purse with both hands, a man with a work cap in his lap. Faces turned down, the posture of people who'd learned to keep their problems small. The desk officer glanced up as the veteran approached, recognition flickering before the professional mask snapped on. Morning, the officer said, forced casual. What can we do for you? The veteran didn't raise his voice, didn't dramatize. He placed the double-bagged cloth on the counter like it was a formal submission and slid his notebook alongside it. I called in, he said. Call dropped. Reporting a torn piece of clothing found near Old Ridge access. Fresh, bagged. Photos taken. Location, time, weather noted. Possible sign of struggle. The desk officer's eyes went to the bag and away again, like looking at it too long might stick it to him. Old Ridge, he repeated. And a fraction of a second later, a door behind the counter opened, and a man stepped out who wore authority like a comfortable jacket. Sheriff Halden, folksy smile, wide shoulders, boots too shiny for someone who said he worked the county hard. He had the kind of face that looked friendly in campaign flyers and hard in dim rooms. "Well now," Halden said, leaning on the counter as if this were neighborly business. "You must be the fella with the dog. Ranger, right?" He glanced at Ranger like he was greeting a mascot, not a living alarm. Ranger didn't wag. He stared, unblinking, as if he'd already filed the man into a category he didn't like. The sheriff chuckled. "Good-looking animal? So what's all this?" The veteran held the sheriff's gaze, calm and unshakable. "Evidence," he said simply, "and a report." Halden's smile didn't disappear. It softened into something patronizing. "Probably kids messing around," he said, tapping the bag with one finger as if it were a potato chip wrapper. "You know how it is. Teens go up there, party, get spooked, rip a shirt on a branch, tell each other ghost stories. Old Ridge brings out the imagination." The veteran slid a photo forward, close-up of the tear pattern. "The snag spacing is too consistent for brush," he said, "and the fabric isn't outdoor gear. It smells like detergent. The stain pattern suggests contact, then force. I'm not speculating. I'm describing." Halden's eyes narrowed for the first time, not in fear, but irritation that someone hadn't accepted his first answer. "Listen," the sheriff said, dropping his voice into a friendly warning. "This town's been through enough rumors lately. People get wound up, start seeing monsters where there ain't any. We don't need panic over a ripped sweatshirt." The veteran didn't flinch. "Then log it," he replied. "Assign a case number. Take chain of custody. If there's nothing, it will show nothing. If there's something, you'll want the record." Behind him, the waiting room went quieter. The woman with the purse watched over the top of her glasses, worry etched deep. But when the sheriff's head tilted slightly in her direction, she looked down fast like she'd been burned. The man with the cap shifted, mouth opening as if he wanted to speak, then closing again. Fear had a way of turning a room into compliant furniture. Halden sighed theatrically, like the veteran was wasting the department's precious time. "All right," he said, and gestured to the desk officer. "Write it up as found property. If someone calls in missing clothing, we'll match it." The veteran's jaw tightened. "Not found property," he corrected. "Potential evidence." Halden's smile returned, sharper around the edges. "You're a vet, right?" he said, the words sweet as molasses and just as sticky. "You've seen bad things. Sometimes that makes a man keyed up. I get it. But out here, we handle things. You should go home, enjoy your coffee, and stop stirring panic." Ranger's lip twitched, a silent warning, and the veteran placed a steady hand on the dog's collar, not to restrain him, but to reassure him. He took his notebook back because he'd watched the sheriff's deputy hesitate with it too long, like they might lose details if given the chance. "If you won't take it properly," the veteran said, "then I'm retaining it. But I want it noted that I tried to submit." Halden's eyes hardened for a beat, the folksy veneer cracking just enough to show the steel underneath. "Noted," he said, and the desk officer scribbled something the veteran couldn't see. The veteran turned to leave, Ranger moving with him in perfect sync, and the moment the station door closed behind them, the air outside tasted different. Too crisp, too clean, like the world was pretending again. He walked to his truck, loaded Ranger in, and pulled out slowly, keeping his hands at 10 and 2, posture unbothered. He made it 2 blocks before he saw it in the rearview mirror, a patrol car easing out from a side street and settling in behind him. Not close enough to be obvious, not far enough to be coincidence. The lights stayed off. The distance stayed measured. And when the veteran made a normal turn, the patrol car turned too, calm and patient, like a shadow with a badge that wanted him to know, quietly, unmistakably, that somebody was watching now. He didn't lead the patrol car anywhere important. Not at first. He drove the long way home, made 2 unnecessary turns through neighborhoods where kids waited for the school bus and nothing ever happened. Then looped back past the park and finally took the road to his place on the edge of town. The cruiser stayed behind him like a metronome, present, patient, until he turned into his gravel drive. It slowed, rolled past without stopping, and for a moment the veteran caught the silhouette of the driver's head pivoting toward the house, toward Ranger, toward the porch, memorizing. Then it continued down the road, as if it had simply been in the area. The veteran watched it disappear, counted 3 breaths after it was gone, and only then did he exhale. Inside, he went straight into the kitchen where the light was clean and honest, bright on countertops and stainless steel. No hiding places in shadow. He washed his hands carefully, like habit and principle in one, then laid out what he needed. Gloves, a fresh zip bag, his notebook, and the torn cloth, still sealed. Ranger paced once, then settled at the doorway between kitchen and living room, facing outward like a sentry. The veteran opened the outer bag, then the inner, and lifted the cloth with gloved fingertips, turning it slowly under the overhead light the way he might inspect a damaged piece of gear. The tear was still ugly, still violent, but now details emerged that fog and adrenaline had blurred. Along one seam, the stitching wasn't generic. It had a distinctive double-track pattern, tight and uniform, done by a commercial machine. The thread color was slightly off from the fabric, a deliberate contrast often used for durability. Near the torn edge, tucked into a fold, was a fragment of tag. Just a corner, but enough. A sliver of white with a bold black letter and part of a number, and beneath it, a wash symbol line. The veteran's eyes narrowed as he angled it closer, and a memory clicked into place. He'd seen that stitch style before, not on hiking clothes, but on workwear and uniforms. Things meant to survive rough handling. He photographed the stitch close up, then the tag fragment, then measured the seam width against a ruler and wrote down the dimensions. If someone tried to tell him later it was nothing, he wanted enough facts to make nothing impossible. Ranger leaned in, sniffed once, then pulled back with a low chuff and stared toward the front of the house as if the scent carried beyond the cloth, beyond the room, out into the world where it didn't belong. The veteran bagged everything again, sealed it, and made a decision that felt both simple and heavy. He was going to narrow the origin himself. In a town this size, there weren't many places that sold uniform-grade clothing. There was one, really, Benton Work and Supply, tucked beside the auto shop, its windows stacked with boots and reflective vests and heavy canvas jackets. The veteran didn't announce himself. He parked where he could see the front door and the side alley, clipped Ranger's leash, and walked in like a customer. A bell jingled overhead. The store smelled like leather, machine oil, and cardboard. The owner, Mr. Benton, stood behind the counter with a catalog open, reading glasses low on his nose. He looked up with a practiced smut that started in the mouth but didn't quite reach the eyes. "Morning," he said. "What can I do you for?" The veteran kept his tone neutral. "Found something," he replied, trying to see where it might have come from. He didn't dump the whole story. He simply set the sealed bag on the counter and slid out the cloth just enough to show the stitch and the tag fragment, careful, controlled. Mr. Benton's face changed in the smallest way, like someone had turned down the lights behind his eyes. His smile faltered. His gaze flicked to the door, then to Ranger, then back to the cloth. "That's..." "That's not mine," he said too quickly, hands staying flat on the counter like touching it would burn. The veteran pointed to the stitch. "That's commercial double needle," he said. "And this tag looks like your supplier's format. I'm not asking you to accuse anyone. I'm asking if you recognize the line." Mr. Benton's throat worked. He forced a chuckle that sounded like a nail bending. "Lots of places use double needle," he said. "Could be anywhere. Nowadays you can order that stuff online. I can't help you." The veteran held his gaze, calm as winter. "You're helping someone by not helping me," he said softly. And the words weren't a threat, just a truth. Mr. Benton's eyes flickered with something that looked like shame, then hardened into fear. "You should drop it," he muttered, barely audible. "Just drop it." Ranger, who had been steady and quiet, suddenly snapped his head toward the back of the store, toward a narrow door that led to a stockroom. His ears pricked so sharply they looked carved. His body went rigid, and a low, controlled growl rolled out of him, aimed at that door like a spotlight. The veteran didn't move his head right away, didn't give away what he'd noticed. But his hand slid down the leash, shortening it by inches. Mr. Benton went pale. His eyes darted toward the same door, then away. And he whispered, almost pleading, "Please." Ranger's growl deepened, and in the silence that followed, the veteran heard it too. The faintest shuffle of a shoe on concrete behind that back door. Someone shifting their weight. Someone who'd been still until the dog called them out. The back door in Benton Work and Supply never opened. Not all the way. Not enough to show a face. But it might as well have swung wide, because the tension in the room changed the instant Ranger pinned it with that low, uncompromising growl. Mr. Benton's hands trembled on the counter, as if the wood itself had turned unstable. And the veteran, a man who'd learned to take in a scene in one sweep, caught the tiny details that mattered. The way Benton's eyes kept flicking toward that door like he was waiting for permission to breathe. The way the air felt warmer near the stockroom, as if a body had been back there long enough to heat it. The way Ranger never broke focus. As if the scent behind that door was the same wrong scent threaded through the torn cloth. The veteran didn't call out again, didn't make a show of it. He simply resealed the cloth in the bag, with slow, deliberate movements, and took one step back from the counter, giving himself space, giving Ranger the angle. "We're leaving," he said quietly to the dog, then to Benton without looking away from the stockroom door. "You should make better choices." Benton swallowed hard and nodded once, a tiny defeat. The veteran walked out without hurrying, because hurrying tells predators you're prey. And when the bell over the front door chimed behind him, it sounded too cheerful for what was happening. Outside, sunlight splashed across the sidewalk, and the town kept moving as if nothing was wrong. But Ranger's body stayed tight, head swiveling once toward the alley, then forward again, as if checking for a tail. The veteran loaded Ranger into the truck and pulled away. But he didn't go straight home. He made 2 turns that forced any follower to commit. And when he caught a dark SUV in his mirror lingering a beat too long at a stop sign, he filed it away like a name. Hard cut, miles and minutes away, in spirit if not distance, to a room that never smelled like wet cedar or diner coffee. The kind of inner room where decisions got made without witnesses. Polished wood table, soft light, no family photos, no clutter, just a framed aerial map of the county on the wall, like a trophy. The local power figure sat with an easy posture, dressed like prosperity, clean cuff, expensive watch that didn't belong to anyone who claimed to be just a public servant. Hair combed with the care of a man who practiced smiling in mirrors. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "We don't have an incident," he said, flipping open a thin folder as if reading from an agenda. "We have a narrative risk." Across from him sat the enforcer type, broader, rougher, the kind of man who looked like he'd learned to solve problems with presence before words, forearms marked with old cuts, jaw set like a lock. He leaned back in his chair, one ankle resting over a knee as if this were entertainment. "A veteran found a piece of cloth," the polished figure continued, tapping a page with a pen. "He thinks he's doing the responsible thing. He's talking to shop owners, asking questions. That's the problem." The enforcer's mouth twitched. "Small town," he said. "Questions echo." The polished figure nodded, calm as a banker. "Exactly. And we can't have echoes. Not with the land deal closing. Not with the permits in motion. Not with the community partnership gala tomorrow night." He slid the folder across the table, and inside were printouts. A grainy still from a security camera near the general store. The veteran's truck parked outside the diner. A close capture of Ranger at his side. The enforcer looked down at the images like he was browsing a menu. "We already handled the first layer," the polished man said, voice still smooth. Sheriff minimized. Dispatcher dropped the call. The store owner clammed up, but he didn't take the hint. He leaned forward slightly, the veneer of friendliness thinning just enough to show the predatory intent beneath. "By morning," he said, each word placed carefully, "this problem needs to disappear. No evidence, no witnesses, no questions." The enforcer's smile was slow, almost amused, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Disappear is flexible," he murmured. "We can scare him, smear him, make him look unstable, or—" He shrugged, casual as if discussing weather. "We can make him busy." The polished figure didn't flinch at the implication. He just straightened a paper edge with meticulous fingers. "I don't care how you do it," he said softly. "I care that it's done clean, quiet, plausible." The enforcer stood, rolling his shoulders like a man warming up for work, and he glanced once at the aerial map on the wall, then back to the folder in his hand. "I'll take a ride," he said. "See what he knows. See who he's told." The polished figure's eyes narrowed with satisfaction. "Good," he said. "And remember, we're not punishing. We're protecting the town from hysteria." The enforcer let out a low chuckle, walked to the door, and before he stepped through, he looked back over his shoulder with that same easy menace. "Don't worry," he said, smile widening as if he'd just solved the whole problem. "I know where the veteran lives." Night came in the way it always did, out on the edge of town. Quiet, gradual, a soft dimming of color across the fields until the tree line turned into one long shadow. But the veteran felt it differently now, like the darkness had weight and intent, like it was being used. He kept the torn cloth double-bagged and locked in a small steel case he'd once used for valuables overseas. Then set that case inside a cabinet no one would think to check, not because he thought wood and hinges could stop a determined person, but because he wanted to buy seconds if someone tried. Ranger tracked every movement, not underfoot, not needy, just present, following room to room with that measured, disciplined focus that made him feel less alone and more covered. The veteran made dinner without appetite, more for routine than comfort, and he listened to the house like it was a living thing. The tick of the refrigerator, the settling of boards, the faint whistle of wind under the eaves. Around 9, he walked the perimeter with a flashlight kept low, checking windows, checking locks, scanning the yard for anything disturbed. The grass lay flat, the gravel drive undisturbed, the world still pretending. He came back inside and shut the door with a controlled then turned off the living room lamp and left only the kitchen light on, a small pool of yellow behind him, while the rest of the house sank into shadow. Ranger took his post near the front window, not lounging, not dozing, just sitting with his spine straight, ears occasionally twitching as he sampled the night. The veteran sat at the table, notebook open, reviewing the day's facts like scripture. Old Ridge. The clerk's tightened smile, Benton's fear, the shuffle behind the stockroom door, the dropped call, the patrol car tail. None of it was random, which meant it was organized, and organized problems didn't resolve themselves. Then, just after 10, the sound came. Tires on gravel, slow and deliberate, the crunch stretched out as if the driver wanted to be heard without being seen. Ranger's head lifted instantly, eyes cutting to the front window. The veteran didn't rush. He stood smoothly, moved to the side of the frame where he could look out without becoming a silhouette, and watched. A vehicle rolled past the end of the driveway at a crawl. Headlights off, only the faint shape of it visible against the darker road. Something dark, maybe an SUV, maybe a truck with tinted windows. It didn't stop. It didn't need to. It was the kind of pass that said, "We know where you are, and we don't have to knock." The veteran's muscles stayed loose, but his mind tightened. He waited until the vehicle's sound faded, then turned to Ranger and gave a silent hand signal, "Stay." Ranger obeyed, body rigid, gaze still fixed outward. The veteran walked to the hallway that led to the spare room where he kept his old gear, and he took out a small motion sensor light he hadn't used in years, setting it low near the back door in a place that would throw glow onto the ground if anything moved. He returned to the kitchen, and as he reached for his coffee mug, cold now, the porch light flickered once, twice, then steadied. Not a power surge. Too precise. Ranger's ears pinned forward, and he rose without sound, stepping between the veteran and the window as if his body was a shield. The dog's tail was still. His mouth stayed closed. But everything in his posture screamed the same message: danger is close. The veteran didn't speak. He reached for his phone and pulled up the outdoor camera app, thumb hovering but not tapping yet. Another flicker from the porch light, this one longer, like a wink. Then, thunk. A hard, dull impact on the roof above the kitchen, followed by a small, skittering roll across shingles. A rock. Not thrown in rage, not meant to break anything, just meant to announce capability. Ranger didn't bark. He simply held that position, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the glass like he could see through it. The veteran felt a familiar cold spread in his chest, the kind that came when someone altered your environment to make you feel small. He refused the feeling. He moved with quiet precision to the cabinet by the sink and took out the flashlight again, then set it down, because light could betray you as much as it helped. Instead, he opened the camera feed. The yard popped onto the screen in grainy night vision. Pale grass, the dark line of trees, the driveway a bright strip. At first, nothing moved. Then, in the corner view near the porch steps, a figure slid into frame. Hood up, face obscured, posture casual like they belonged there. They stood just outside the main pool of the porch light, as if they knew exactly where the lens angle ended. The veteran zoomed in, heart steady, breathing controlled. The figure lifted one hand slightly, and something caught the infrared glow, a small metallic glint near the chest or wrist. The shape wasn't clear, but it flashed like polished metal, like an emblem catching light, like a badge. Ranger's body tightened even more, and the veteran stared at the screen, realizing the message had shifted from intimidation to something darker. They weren't just watching him. They were daring him to believe the people meant to protect him were part of the threat. The figure on the camera feed didn't linger long enough to be identified. which told the veteran it wasn't about bravery, it was about control. Whoever stood on his porch wanted the image to exist, just long enough to get inside his head. Then they stepped backward into the blind edge of the frame and vanished, leaving only an empty set of porch steps and the porch light burning steady again, like nothing had happened. The veteran didn't chase into the yard, didn't fling the door open and give the night what it wanted. He shut the camera app, turned off every interior light except a single lamp far back in the house, misdirection, silhouette management, and sat with Ranger in the living room, where he had sight lines and cover. Ranger stayed planted between him and the front windows, a living barrier, eyes bright in the dim, listening so hard the veteran could almost feel it. Midnight slid closer, and the house settled into that deceptive quiet, where every creak sounded like a footstep. The veteran kept his phone in hand, thumb hovering over the call button to a state hotline he'd found earlier. But he didn't hit it yet. He wanted to move in facts, not panic. And he knew calls could be intercepted if the wrong people had decided they owned the wires. Instead, he wrote down what he'd seen. Hooded figure, porch steps, metallic glint consistent with badge-like object, timestamp. He backed up the footage to 2 places, his phone and a hidden memory card, because nothing stays safe in one place when someone else is trying to erase it. Around 1 in the morning, Ranger's head snapped toward the back of the house. Not toward the woods this time, but toward the gravel drive, and a quiet sound escaped him. One short, controlled huff that meant movement. The veteran rose without starting, moving like he'd practiced this 1,000 times, and took position where he could see the side window without being seen. Headlights appeared at the edge of the property, not blinding, not fast. Just a vehicle easing in, engine low, stopping short of the porch as if the driver didn't want to be fully lit. The veteran didn't breathe for a moment. Then the driver's door opened, and a shape stepped out alone. Not the hooded figure, smaller, trembling in posture, shoulders hunched like the cold wasn't the only thing weighing them down. The figure lifted both hands slightly, palms visible, a universal sign. Don't shoot, don't attack. I'm not here to hurt you. Ranger growled once, low, then went silent again, watching. The veteran didn't open the front door. He moved to the side door instead, the one that put a wall between him and the driveway, and he cracked it just enough to speak through. "Stop right there," he said, voice calm but unyielding. "State your name and what you want." The person swallowed hard and stepped into the weak spill of moonlight. Young woman, mid-20s, hair pulled back in a messy knot, wearing a county-issued jacket that looked too big and too official for how frightened she was. Her eyes were red like she'd cried and then hated herself for it. "My name is Leah," she whispered. I'm a dispatcher." The veteran's jaw tightened. "You dropped my call," he said, not accusing, just stating. Leah flinched as if the words were a slap. "I didn't," she breathed. I did, but not because I wanted to." Her hands shook as she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small plastic evidence sleeve, the kind used for documents, and a slim flash drive taped to a folded sheet of paper. "Please," she said, voice cracking. "You have to take this. You have to look at it before they fix it." Ranger's head lowered slightly, eyes still locked, reading her truth in micro-movements the way only a dog could. The veteran opened the door a fraction more, keeping his body behind it, and extended one gloved hand to receive what she offered. He didn't let her cross the threshold. He didn't have to. Leah slid the items into his palm like she was passing contraband. "What is it?" he asked. Leah's breath hitched. "It's the call log," she said, words tumbling out now that the dam had cracked. "Your call tonight. The drop wasn't a glitch. It was flagged. Someone patched a supervisor line in. And your report from earlier? The one you tried to file? It was never entered as evidence. It was rerouted, tagged as miscellaneous and sent to a dead queue. Her eyes darted toward the dark road behind her, terror sharpening her voice. And there's worse. The veteran's fingers tightened around the drive. Slow down, he said, steadying the moment. Tell me exactly. Leah nodded quickly, tears shining but not falling. A missing person report came in 3 days ago, she whispered. A young woman, filed by her sister. She said she never came home from her shift. Leah swallowed, forcing herself through the words like glass. The report was entered at first, then it got reassigned. Like it was a traffic ticket, like it didn't matter. She tapped the folded paper with a trembling finger. I printed the revision history. It shows who touched it and when. It shows it was redirected away from investigation. And the drive, she held her breath like she was about to jump off something. The drive has a clip from a camera near Old Ridge Access. It was overwritten, but I pulled a cached copy. It shows a vehicle out there the night she went missing. County vehicle. Same unit number as one of ours. The veteran felt something cold and exact settle into place inside him. Not suspicion anymore. Structure. Intent. Leah, he said softly. Why are you doing this? She looked at him, shame and courage fighting across her face. Because I heard her sister's voice, she whispered. And I told myself it wasn't my job to fight it. And then you called, and I heard the click, and I realized it's not that nobody knows. It's that people are choosing not to. She drew in a shaky breath. I can't sleep, I can't. Her words cut off as Ranger's ears snapped up again, not toward Leah, but toward the front windows. The veteran felt it too before he saw it. A low engine note approaching, too smooth, too confident. Then headlights swept across the living room wall through the blinds in a bright moving band of light, painting the furniture in stark white for a split second. Leah's face drained of color. No, she breathed, panic flooding her voice. I wasn't followed. I was careful. The headlights stopped, flooding the front of the house, and the veteran tightened his grip on the flash drive as Ranger moved soundlessly to the window, body rigid, ready. Outside, tires crunched on gravel. Someone had pulled into the drive, close, deliberate. And the light that poured through the windows made one thing clear. Whoever was out there wanted them to know they'd arrived. The headlights stayed pinned to the house like interrogation lamps, but the veteran didn't give them the reaction they wanted. No frantic dash, no porch confrontation. Because he'd already shifted into the only game that beats a rigged local board. Clean procedure, external escalation, and redundancy. He moved Leah into the hallway out of the direct window line, spoke to her in a low, steady tone that pulled her back from the edge, and then he executed steps like a checklist he'd lived by. Copy the files, hash them, document transfer, establish a chain no one could lose. He plugged the drive into a laptop that never touched the home Wi-Fi, duplicated the contents to 2 encrypted sticks, and filmed the screen with his phone while the files copied. Time stamps visible. Leah in frame stating her name and role and why she came. He photographed the printed revision history, then recorded himself reading the key entries out loud. Because paper disappears and voices don't unsay. Ranger stayed between them and the windows like a statue carved from loyalty. And when the headlights finally moved, rolling back down the drive, purposeful, satisfied, the veteran let them go. because he wasn't trying to win a nighttime staring contest. He was building a case that would survive daylight. Before dawn, he drove Leah to a safe location outside town limits, then made a call from a payphone at a roadside gas station the next county over. Old school, unromantic, effective, reaching a state-level investigative office and requesting an agent on duty. He spoke in facts and numbers, not accusations. A missing person report rerouted, call logs tampered, video evidence of a county vehicle near Old Ridge, intimidation at his home, and a whistleblower willing to testify. He offered to meet at a neutral site and transfer evidence with a signed receipt. The agent didn't laugh. The agent asked for names and unit numbers. The veteran gave them. And then he heard a different kind of click on the line. The sound of wheels locking into place on the right track. By midday, unmarked cars rolled into town like quiet thunder, and the fragile illusion of "we handle things here" started to crack. Paperwork hit desks. Warrants were drafted with a precision that didn't care who shook hands at the diner. Investigators interviewed Leah first, then pulled the original 911 recordings and server logs, then marched those logs straight past the local chain of command. The sheriff tried his folksy smile when the first questions came, tried to wave it off as misunderstanding and paperwork. But cameras found him anyway, because a state unit doesn't arrive in secret for nothing. And rumors travel faster than police radios in a small town. The enforcer, the one who'd used fear like a tool, showed up at the station with swagger and hollow confidence, only to have that confidence drain when he saw who was waiting. Not his usual circle, but clean suits with credentials that didn't answer to him. His grin faltered when an investigator slid a photo across the table. The hooded figure on the veteran's porch, the metallic glint. And then a second image, the same wrist, the same watch, captured from an unrelated traffic cam. The first domino fell when a judge signed off and doors opened that had never opened for locals. The work supply back room, the evidence room, the sheriff's private office file cabinet. The second domino fell when a deputy, cornered by facts and finally offered a way out, admitted on record that reports had been managed. The third fell when the overwritten camera cache showed the county unit number near Old Ridge on the night the missing woman vanished. And suddenly, kids messing around became obstruction, conspiracy, and tampering. Arrests didn't come with sirens at first. They came with quiet handcuffs in fluorescent hallways, then with reporters outside as the news hit the feed. The sheriff's folksy mask cracked in front of microphones when he realized his old tricks didn't work on people who didn't owe him favors. The enforcer's swagger collapsed into pleading when he saw the file stack and understood intimidation was now evidence, not leverage. And when the missing woman was finally found, alive, shaken, but alive, pulled from a place no one wanted to look too closely at because it belonged to someone important, the town's stomach turned collectively, a moral nausea that forced eyes open. There was no cheap celebration, no instant forgiveness, just a hard, necessary reckoning. A vigil held with her name spoken clearly, her dignity protected, her family surrounded, and her survival treated not as gossip, but as a sacred fact that demanded accountability. In the weeks that followed, restoration didn't look like a movie montage. It looked like neighbors bringing meals without asking for credit, witnesses stepping forward because courage had become contagious, and a veteran walking the same trail at dawn with Ranger at heel. The air still carrying wet cedar and cold soil, knowing the town would never be as naive again. And that, for once, was a kind of healing. Weeks later, when the last of the news vans had finally rolled out and the courthouse steps stopped feeling like a stage, The town tried to settle back into its old habits. Smiles returning to faces like bandages, conversations, shifting back to weather and football, and whose cousin was fixing whose roof. But the veteran could still sense the thin places in that normal, the spots where reality had rubbed through and exposed what had been underneath the whole time. He didn't resent the town for wanting comfort. He understood it too well. Comfort was a survival strategy, but he also understood the cost of comfort when it demanded silence. On a cold, bright morning, December clear air without the fog this time, he and Ranger returned to the trail not because he was looking for trouble, but because the land itself had become a ledger he needed to balance. A place where something wrong had happened, and where something right had finally been done. The pines stood the same, tall and quiet, but the veteran noticed the differences most people would miss. A new posted sign at the old ridge spur, warning against trespassing. Fresh survey tape fluttering where investigators had marked points of interest, a section of brush trampled down and then regrown in patchy, stubborn clumps. The creek still whispered over stones, birds still tested the morning with small calls. And for a minute the world offered him that old, simple illusion of peace. Ranger walked close, shoulder almost brushing the veteran's leg, not because he needed reassurance, but because that was the position of a partner who had chosen his duty. The dog's eyes stayed busy, scanning the tree line with a calm vigilance that never fully turned off. Even now that arrests had been made, and the sheriff's office had new oversight, and the enforcer sat behind a different kind of door. The veteran's boots found the bend in the trail where the whole thing had begun, and he slowed, letting the memory rise without letting it drown him. The mist, the sudden crack, the wet slap of torn fabric at his feet. He knelt in the same spot, gloves on out of habit though he wasn't touching evidence anymore. And he studied the ground as if it could still explain itself. Ranger stopped beside him and stared into the woods, ears pricked. Not growling, not tense. Just watching with an intensity that felt older than this case. Older than this town. The veteran followed the line of Ranger's gaze and saw nothing. Just trunks, shadow, and winter light filtering through needles. But something about the dog's posture nudged a thought loose in his mind. A thought that had been circling since the day Leah showed up shaking in his driveway. He remembered the clerk's tightened smile at the general store. The way the room had held its breath at the mention of Old Ridge. The way Benton had looked like a man carrying a secret too heavy to stand upright. And then, sharper than all of it, he remembered the small scraps of local talk he'd overheard long before any of this. "That dog of yours is spooky," someone had joked at the diner once, laughing too hard. "He don't like near the ridge," an old-timer had muttered at the farm supply store. "Animals know," a woman had whispered at church after a storm knocked power out and Ranger refused to go inside. At the time, the veteran had filed it away as small-town superstition, the kind of folklore people used to make sense of unease they didn't want to name. But kneeling there now, watching Ranger's eyes track a stretch of woods like it contained a truth still humming, he realized something that shifted the air inside his chest. Ranger hadn't just reacted that first morning like a dog startled by a scent. Ranger had behaved like a dog who had seen the pattern before. Like a dog who had tried, again and again, in small moments no one took seriously, to point toward the same wrongness and been ignored because it was easier to laugh, easier to shrug, easier to say, "Probably kids," than to admit the town had a rot behind its pretty face. The veteran pictured it. Ranger stiffening on walks near certain roads, refusing to pass certain driveways, growling at nothing because the nothing was a familiar human scent masked by detergent and power. He imagined other mornings, other citizens, who had felt a weird chill near Old Ridge and told themselves it was just the weather, just their imagination, just a story. He imagined Ranger tugging, stopping, warning, only to be pulled along with a cheerful, dismissive, "Come on, boy." The thought didn't make him feel proud. It made him feel sick. Not at Ranger, never at Ranger, but at how many times a warning can be offered before it becomes background noise. He stood slowly, brushing dirt from his knee, and Ranger glanced up at him, eyes steady, trusting, waiting. The veteran reached down and rested a hand on the dog's neck, fingers sinking into warm fur, feeling the solid calm of him like an anchor. "You tried," he said softly, voice rougher than he meant it to be. Ranger's tail thumped once, controlled, and he leaned into the touch as if to say, "Yes, finally, you understand." The veteran looked out at the trees again and felt the weight of the truth settle in a way no courtroom ever could. This wasn't the first time Ranger had warned someone. It was just the first time someone listened.